Hello and welcome to Northwest Newsweek. I'm Mitchell Ringos. Well, the mayor and deputy mayor of Ignace have resigned, and an interim mayor has been appointed in what was a tumultuous week for the township. The reduced council now faces a number of serious challenges. During Tuesday's emergency council meeting, Ignace's remaining 3 council members voted unanimously to accept the resignation of Mayor Bill Gascon and Deputy Mayor Al Zimmer, and to appoint Councillor Kim Bagree as interim mayor. In a written statement, the township called the resignations unfortunate but warranted. Outside, about a dozen supporters of the former mayor protested, with signs calling for the resignation of Councillor John Taddeo and an end to corruption. Meanwhile, OPP have now confirmed there's a fraud investigation underway focused on the municipal office. The Ministry of Labour has also confirmed that it's conducting an investigation into workplace harassment. 3 orders have been issued against the township. Those details should be released once the investigation concludes, and for now there are 2 vacancies on the 5-person council. They will have to decide whether to appoint new councillors or call a by-election. Also in Ignace last week, a panel of international experts shared nuclear waste site experience with local residents, who will soon have to decide whether they want to see spent nuclear fuel buried in the region. Kurt Black has more.
A trio of speakers shared both technical and political expertise from nuclear waste disposal projects, similar to the one being proposed for the Ignace area. Tina Jalonen is the senior vice president of the Finnish company building what will be the world's first deep geological repository. And Jakob Spongenberg was mayor of the municipality that voted to host Sweden's facility. Both say that a well-informed local population is crucial to establishing a nuclear waste site.
Be curious to one another, both sides, and ask questions and communicate, learn from each other. That's the way to make it familiar.
It takes a lot of time because you need to know, you have to build your understanding and competence, and there is no one else but yourselves that are able to take the decision and understand what is best for you.
The NWMO hosted a number of events around the area. Attendees we spoke to in Ignace generally appreciated the meeting and spoke favorably about the project.
Their kind of perspective that they are able to bring here is critical to building a knowledge base, right, and building that trust base.
I'm very confident that it's safe and it's done safely and it's beneficial to not just us here in Canada, but the whole world.
I think it was good.
I got some good answers, and I still don't know the best way to transport it, but nobody really does.
They covered a lot of things about transporting, and that's been a big concern of ours in Canada.
Looking forward to see it happening.
However, not everyone in Ignace approves.
There's so many unanswered questions, so many studies that I feel haven't been done properly.
For NWMO site director Joanne Jasek, bringing in the guests was all about making it easier for the public to access diverse sources of information.
People are coming from a place, they're interested in this because they believe that there's a decision that can be made, that there's an opportunity to protect the environment, to protect people.
Kurt Black, TBT News.
This past Saturday marked 1 year since the Northern Ontario School of Medicine became the first independent medical university in Canada. The school's goal is to develop doctors who choose to stay in the North, and according to the latest statistics, nearly half of the graduates are doing just that. More than 1,000 doctors have completed their medical degree and/or residency at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine since it accepted its first cohort in 2005. Of these, 467 doctors, or 46%, have stayed to practice in the North. That includes 161 doctors practicing here in the Northwest and 50 in rural communities.
We're extremely satisfied. In fact, I think we have one of the highest rates of recruitment and retention in the country for those medical schools that are established at 17 in the country.
Despite the encouraging statistics, Verma cautioned that not all graduates start the residency right away, and some have to do so elsewhere. NOSM currently only has 9 residency positions available of more than 130 in the province, But Verma says that will soon change thanks to a significant expansion.
Now, with the expansion, which is an astounding, unprecedented opportunity for us of the medical school, we're going to be almost doubling the size of the MD program. But we're also looking to open up almost 20 residency programs.
Nossum is still a university in its infancy, and there are still major challenges attracting family medicine practitioners to Northern Ontario.
One of the biggest problems is that we can actually bring people in and educate and train them, but it's actually up to the community, the municipality, the city to then recruit and retain them.
Verma says Nossum is working with a number of municipalities to help address those remaining challenges. The fight is on between Terrace Bay and Schreiber. Each community is hoping to make the case that it's the better location for a new EMS station. The chief of Superior North EMS was recently in Terrace Bay to consult with local stakeholders about the amalgamation of the two existing stations. Lee Noonan was there.
Terrace Bay has the hospital, a bigger population, and higher call volume, which Mayor Paul Malashewski says makes his town the right choice, while Schreiber Mayor Kevin Mullins feels that the township's more central location makes it the better location for them and communities to the west.
Well, I think everyone on council and administration are going to fight hard to have the ambulance stay in Terrace Bay.
I really believe the region would be better with the ambulance being centralized in Schreiber.
The new EMS station will house the same number of ambulances and paramedics that are currently stationed between the two communities, allowing the EMS service to stagger its shifts in a way that increases the time paramedics are on site and reduces average wait times, according to Superior North EMS Chief Shane Muir.
They get that response notification that there's a 911 call. They can walk down, jump into the ambulance right away, have quick rising doors, and be out and responding to that call within 90 seconds.
Muir does admit that while response times should be faster overall, they would be slower in some cases, something neither mayor wants.
Well, we're looking after the interests of our community, so yeah, obviously he wants it in Schreiber and we want it in Terrace Bay.
Muir also hopes the new schedule will help avoid burnout and that a new station with modern working and living quarters will help address the service's difficulties with recruitment and retention in the area.
It's a big draw for paramedics. They can come in, they can use their skills and use modern equipment and work in great communities where the people are really pleasurable, and they'll be excited to be here.
Muir also talked about increasing paramedicine work in the communities and a new dispatch system that's expected to improve the prioritization of 911 calls. The power structure of Superior North EMS was also a major discussion point, with some expressing dismay that Thunder Bay City Council had the authority to amalgamate district EMS stations in the first place.
It's too bad that it came down to this, but Thunder Bay has made a decision and Shane's going to abide by it.
Muir wants to have a site selected quickly and shovels in the ground this year if possible, and both communities are ready with several suggestions for possible locations. Meanwhile, a site selection process is also underway in Nipigon Red Rock. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
And after the break, a historic plaque commemorating a key moment in the history of trans people in Ontario was unveiled in Fort Frances. Welcome back. And like we were saying before the break, the first provincial heritage plaque commemorating a key moment in the history of trans people in Ontario was unveiled on Friday. It's not located in the gay village of a major urban centre, but here in the northwestern Ontario, just outside the Fort Frances Hospital. Lee Noonan has more.
The province's newest historic plaque and the first to celebrate trans history now sits outside the La Vérendrye Hospital in Fort Frances. The plaque commemorates Diana Boileau, the first Canadian to receive gender-affirming surgery, and the Fort Frances doctor who supported her.
Like, while she did encounter some discrimination and prejudice, for sure, she also lived a life where she had support of friends and family. She had support of her doctor, Dr. Chalice, and she was able to transition so long ago. So I think it's very important for people today to see that it is possible to be happy and to transition and live your life. I think it's really important for people to see that their story exists beyond just them and they're not alone.
According to her 1972 memoir, Boileau first came to Dr. Harold Chalice looking for an excuse to avoid gym. Dr. Chalice had moved his young family to Fort Frances from London, England, where he would have been exposed to some of the earliest medical research on surgical transition.
My father crossed over paths with surgeons at the University of London, and that's where obviously he got early insight into the transgender experience.
He had such a wide range of interests, and he was so knowledgeable in so many areas that young people really could engage, and he would be open to any kind of questions.
As co-chair of Borderland Pride, Douglas Judson led the effort to get the plaque installed in Fort Frances. He says it's amazing that in the 50s, a trans woman in Northern Ontario would have met a doctor who supported her transition, something that trans people today still can't count on.
The words that we're putting on this iron plaque in Fort Frances, it's going to be stuck in the ground 200 meters from an international border where the environment is still not very safe or supportive.
Both Bush and Judson hope the plaque will help show that trans people can come from anywhere and that they do belong in the community. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
The driver of a transport truck that crashed into two homes on Highway 11 in Beardmore last month has now been charged. This was the dramatic scene back on March 17th, hours after the rig barreled into the houses just before 1 a.m. At least one of the homes had people sleeping inside at the time, but fortunately no one in either structure was injured. Occupants of the transport were taken to hospital in Nipigon for treatment. OPP have now confirmed that the 24-year-old driver from Brampton has been charged with careless driving and will appear in a Greenstone court at a later date. The historic flooding in the Rainy River Lake area last year couldn't have been prevented. That's according to an international commission charged with monitoring water levels in the area. According to the International Rainy Lake of the Woods Watershed Board, preventative measures would have made little difference in the wake of unprecedented rainfall. Computer simulations show that even in a best-case scenario, peak water levels on Rainy Lake would have only been about 4 centimeters lower and receded 2 days sooner. The Namakan Lake peak levels could have been only about 1 centimeter lower and receded 1 day earlier. Canadian Chair Megan Gardner says that while centimeters do matter, there was no way to have predicted the massive rainfall that ultimately led to the flood.
If we had done the most irresponsible thing in the spring, not knowing that it was going to rain and drain both lakes, that all they would have gotten for that huge risk is 1 to 4 centimeters difference, with the consequence that if it hadn't rained historically like it did, that there would have been detrimental effects to environment and low water levels all summer.
The committee will implement measures to more quickly adjust to changing water levels. Gardner says there also needs to be more transparency and reliable communication with the public. Thunder Bay Superior North MPP Lise Vaugeois is pressing the Ford government to add hospital capacity for northwestern Ontario patients in need of dialysis treatment. She rose at Queen's Park, saying it's unfair that patients in need must relocate to Thunder Bay to get the care they need.
In the entire area from the Manitoba border to White River all the way up to Hudson's Bay,
Anyone needing dialysis treatment must move to Thunder Bay because we have the only hospital that currently has dialysis capacity. After 9 months of living in Thunder Bay to receive treatment, Carol Davis has already spent $17,000 in expenses. So it's not only incredibly costly, it is also cruel that people who are sick have to move away from their homes, friends, and families. Minister, when will you be adding capacity to the 3 hospitals that already have dialysis units, and when will you be opening more dialysis units throughout the region?
Life-saving dialysis treatment is something that we want to be able to expand and ensure that people can get as close to home as possible. In fact, in the north, we have Ontario Health has identified capital initiatives to expand dialysis stations in Thunder Bay Regional Health Science Centre, Dryden Regional Health Centre, Lake of the Woods District Hospital in Kenora, and Waha to improve dialysis in the province of Ontario. We know that people need these life-saving interventions as close to home as possible, and that is exactly what we're doing with Your Ontario Health.
Bourgeois tried to pin down a date for those expansions, but didn't get a response. She also insists the Northern Health Travel Grant needs to provide more money to cover costs incurred by patients who are forced to relocate. The Schreiber Fire Department is warning the public to avoid Old Curling Club after the building collapsed on the night of April 1st. In a Facebook post, the fire department said the walls are currently being supported only by the substantial snowbanks, and further collapses are expected as the snow begins to melt. Fire officials are warning area residents to avoid the property.
I was on the couch watching TV, lying down on the couch watching TV. I heard a large crackling noise, and my dogs woke up and started barking, and then I looked out the window and seen a bunch of dust.
The Old Curling Club is remembered fondly by many in Schreiber, but hadn't been used as a curling rink in decades. When we return, Fort Frances is getting a provincial judge in the community for the first time in a decade. Welcome back. Applications are now closed for the new judicial seat in Fort Frances, and the local law association is looking forward to having a judge in the community, as according to the association, there hasn't been a provincial judge there for more than a decade. Lee Noonan has more.
The Rainy River District Law Association has long been pushing for a judge to be appointed in Fort Frances. They say there hasn't been a judge living in town since 2012, causing a number of negative impacts on the local justice system.
Sometimes it's just simple stuff like your judge needs to be able to return home before it gets dark, and therefore your court has to adjourn, and your client's matter doesn't get reached that day on the docket or gets adjourned an entire month till the next available day. It shakes confidence in the administration of justice when people show up to court and don't feel like they're being heard, don't feel like everyone has really had time to absorb the material, and feel like they're being ushered out of the room too quickly.
Judson says he's optimistic that the appointment of a provincial judge locally will allow for a, quote, full-service justice system for the Rainy River District.
Well, I think by having a judge based in your court, you have someone presiding who becomes familiar with the community, understands the different areas of the region that they serve, understands, just things that go without saying sometimes about where stuff is located and, what the history of different communities, particularly local Indigenous communities, might be. And they get to sort of invest themselves into the local justice system and the fabric of the programs we're developing.
The separation of powers between government and courts complicated the process, says Judson, with Queen's Park controlling the purse strings, but courts determining where and when to appoint new judges. The pandemic, however, and the introduction of virtual court actually strengthened their case.
Before, when we'd sometimes get the argument, well, the Fort Frances court isn't busy enough to have a judge based there. Now we can say, well, if you base a judge here, they can fill gaps in other jurisdictions remotely because we have the technology to do that now.
Judson doesn't know when the new judge will be announced, but he hopes that whoever gets the job, they're ready to put down roots in Fort Frances. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
T-Batel mobility customers have started hearing a recorded message when they dial a 7-digit phone number. The alert is meant to get callers used to the idea of including the 807 area code for all local phone calls.
The local number you have dialed must be preceded by its area code. Your call will now proceed.
T-Batel had originally expected the advisory message to begin on April 1st, but officials say after working with their technical partners at Rogers, they were able to speed up the timeline. The recorded message gives mobility customers a window to prepare themselves for the 10-digit dialing process that will be implemented May 31st. T-Batel spokesperson Jamie Smith says they still intend to introduce 10-digit dialing in stages, and the transition for home and business phones won't begin until sometime this fall.
We're taking a phased approach. For our landline network, we've been doing a massive sort of multi-year project to modernize and make our network more efficient. So as of May 31st, and for now, it's for mobility, and then later in the fall, we'll start to roll out some timelines for this to be enabled for our landline customers as well.
Smith says if customers have questions about 10-digit dialing, more information can be found online at tbatel.net/10-digit dialing. After the recent winter storm, wildfires may be the last thing on the minds of northwestern Ontario residents, but the province's forest fire season officially began on April 1st. While it's still too early to tell how the season will go, MNRF crews are ready to respond to any wildfires that spark up. Ryan Benazzo reports.
On the heels of a significant winter storm, wildfires are unlikely to pop up in northwestern Ontario in the coming days. But Fire Information Officer Chris Marchand from the Regional Fire Management Centre in Dryden says that can change in a hurry at this time of year.
Spring is always a time of extra concern for the fire program when it comes to wildland fires for a few reasons. Spring fires can move quite quickly through dead grass and dry brush in that period between when the snow cover retreats and the forest starts to green up. Spring fires are almost exclusively human-caused and tend to show up in places near people, property, and infrastructure that really require a quick response.
Fortunately, provincial fire crews began preparing leading up to the official start of the fire season and are ready to deliver that quick response if needed. Marchand says it's too early to accurately say what will be in store this fire season, but the outlook appears positive at this time.
Long-range forecasts do indicate that we could be in for cooler than normal spring temperatures in the northwest. This could help us hang on to some of the snow cover that we have a little longer, which is a benefit in helping to moderate that spring fire hazard.
And late snowfalls like the one this week can be a big help, assuming the temperatures don't then rise too rapidly.
A nice slow melt is always better than a quick melt where runoff can go into waterways just over frozen ground and not have much effect. So you want that snow to disappear nice and slowly and not necessarily be taken up by the winds. You want it to melt with rainfall and soak the ground well.
Marchand notes last year's fire season was one of the quietest that he can recall after a historically bad year in 2021. Ryan Bonazzo, TBT News.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week.